And we're back to HTML SVG. Let us talk about linear gradients. We'll start by creating an SVG parent. Inside we need a defs, which is an SVG tag for filters, as this linear gradient is basically a filter in HTML SVG at least. And let's create an ellipse. I want to apply the gradient to. We need Cx and Cy as the center position and Rx, Ry for the size of the radius. And we also need a fill. Let me make it maybe 150, and I use like 85, 55, something like this. I'll make it black for now, and we need to adjust our SVG. I'll give it height and width. Maybe I'll make it 250 times 400, that should be enough. But I have to adjust the Cy value a little bit. Obviously, as our radius is too big for it, but now we can see it right here on our SVG canvas. Now let's go to our filter. As I've said, we need the defs, and inside we'll nest our linear gradient. We need a closing tag for it. Keep in mind that all of this is nested inside of the SVG. It's important to write it like this. The colors of the gradient, we can adjust them using a stub. Let us start with 2 colors at first. And now we connect our gradient to our ellipse, and we need to use the ID for it. So for fill we use URL. And then the ID selector, call it grad for gradient. It's a good idea to use, for example, gradient 1, gradient 2 when you have multiple. For this example, grad is fine. We can adjust the positions for the gradient with X and Y here as well. Let us go from 0 to 100% horizontally. So we need X1, 0 and X2, 100. And we don't want to have a diagonal or a vertical one, so we keep the Y value to 0. If we set this to 100, it would go from top to bottom as well. So only X2 is 100, the other values are 0. We haven't yet added any colors, so we need to go to our stub. And we basically need just a couple of attributes, for example, offset for the start position and style. But it's important to add a stop opacity, because by default this is set to 0. And we want to see our color with an opacity of 0, we won't. So the stub would be the first color on the left with an offset of 0. Let me copy paste this here, and I make the second stub an offset of 100. It also has a stop opacity of 1. And I change the colors, and now if I haven't made typos, we should be good. So you can see this gradient right here. Let us play around with the values. So offset becomes clear if I set it to 50. This one just moves to the right of the element. But we can also use it for X1 right here. So if I make this 50, it looks the same. You can see offset and these X values as the same in this context. Same goes for X2, which would be the end position. This would be the same as the offset for our second stub. And as I've said, we can also adjust the Y value to have a vertical gradient, and we can combine them to have diagonal. So this is what these X, Y, and offset attributes or values are. Stop opacity, as I've said, if we take it away, it is set by default to 0. So the ellipse is going to vanish as it doesn't have a fill anymore. It's fully opaque. And even if you've just added it to one stop, you're not going to see anything. Let us, for example, make it 0.5. And this is now 50% opaque. You can obviously adjust the color right here. I've used RGB values. Now you might have asked yourself, what if I want to have more than 2 colors in my gradient? Or we can simply add more stops. So if I, for example, just copy the first one and paste it, and I want to set it to the center position of our ellipse, we'll just use an offset of 50%. Let me change the color. I'll keep the stop opacity to 1, obviously. And now we have a third color in our gradient. And this is how you can add a linear gradient to any element in HTML SVG. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.